Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is particle and wave. And we're going to compare that to the distinction between intention and goals, and learning to live in the wave, in the field, versus in the specificity and limitation of goals. To be, instead of using will, to be motivating and moving through intentionality and into the flow. So it should be a really fun conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold them. Hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel all those sensations, the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, and the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it's great to be here with you this morning. And we're talking today about particle and wave. And this comes from a revelation that I had in a conversation the other day, talking about, I don't know if you're familiar with the Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if it's called hypothesis, analogy, theory. I don't know what it is, but the idea is that there's a cat in the box, and until you open the box, the cat is neither alive or dead. It's kind of the same. And then when you open the box, the cat is either alive or dead. And what has happened is, before the box is open, there is a field of possibility. Both potentials exist, and then once the box is open, one potential manifests. Okay, so it's going from this field of possibility to one particular outcome. And we can also liken this conversation to the double slit experiments done with light, where light, when light is being measured as a wave, it it scatters. When it's being measured as a particle, it creates a point of light. And that may be a really poor representation of the double slit experiment. And if it is, please forgive me. But the idea is that it becomes what we are expecting, in other words. So if we're expecting it to be acting like a wave, it acts like a wave. If we expect it to be acting like a particle, it acts like a particle. And so that, to get back to this, creating an intention versus a goal. So the revelation was that when we have an intention, what we're doing is activating a field of potential that has its constraints, but it's creating this field that is an attractive field. And within that attractive field, it leaves room for all kinds of possibilities for the universe to collaborate with us and create these awesome outcomes. And so when we're talking about these awesome outcomes, what I'm referencing is all kinds of amazing synchronicities that occur and weave through time and circumstance to make these superficially bizarro kinds of connections that we couldn't necessarily anticipate. And when we set a goal, the goal, what defines a goal, what makes a goal, is that it has a very specific outcome, intended outcome, and it is time bound. So in fact, when we talk about making SMART goals, I don't remember what each of the letters represent, but one is specific, achievable. I'm not remembering at the moment what M is, and time bound. Okay. Whereas an intention can get corrected over time. It's more like taking a bucket of water from the river is a goal. Being in the river is the intention. And when goals are often something that is linear, is going from A to B. The intention or the expectation with the goal is that it's driven typically by will. And oftentimes when we have these phrases like put your nose to the grindstone, focus, whatever. When we're focusing, when we're putting our nose to the grindstone, what we're doing is we're eliminating a lot of possibilities and a lot of information and a lot of potentials, versus when we hold the intention, there's a greater receptivity. There's an openness to be able to adapt and respond to the winks of the universe, as I call them, where the universe collaborates with us in these magical ways that expand the potentials, expand the possibilities, and generate a greater sense of alignment. Like when we're aligned, we can allow for the flow of these things. We can be present, we can be more responsive. And intention gives greater breathing room. So an example, and I've given this before, but an example was a friend who was having a party, family gathering, and this person wrestled with perfectionism and making everything perfect, and we realigned her goal of, because with the goal of making it all perfect and having the party, then everything had to look exactly right and be exactly right and go without any hiccups. When she recalibrated to make an intention that everybody have a great time at this gathering, then it didn't matter what the water pitcher looked like, that it didn't matter if there was something that didn't turn out or didn't show up exactly the way that she had envisioned it, because it was incidental to the intention. All of those things ended up serving the intention rather than being the objective. And so the phrase power versus force comes to mind, that the field grants us power, because when we can be in alignment and in flow with the field, then there we have vast potentials available to us. When we're forcing, when we're moving purely by force of will with a goal, we're often ignoring and not present to the process. And if we that's another thing, is the distinction between particle and wave, is the distinction between process and product. And what happens so much in life is that we focus our attention on product and outcome and blind ourselves to the process. And in fact, life is process. And when we allow ourselves to engage with life as process rather than as outcome, there's an vast freedom that then opens to us. So, for instance, if something happens that I am very unhappy about, if I view life through the lens of particle outcome, then I can get obsessed with or anchored to that outcome. If I view life as process, I can recognize that outcome, that result, is part of a greater process, that it's not over with that one outcome, that event, that result is part of a bigger picture, part of a system. And if we look at, we may not, that the system may not be penetrable, we may not be able to see into the workings of the system, but there is a greater picture that is inclusive of that event, but not limited to it. And so what happens as a result of that point of view is that there's greater expansiveness in our experience, because it's not over till it's over. You know, we don't know what the ultimate outcome is. We tend to focus on specific events, specific precipitated particles, rather than recognizing the wave. And I was thinking that this also plays into the notion of identity. We tend to relate to identity from the particle vantage point, like this is who I am as distinct from other things, and that who I am is a fixed entity, when in fact, well, I think it's in fact, this is in my world at this point, in my hypotheses around this, try it on and see if it works for you. We are ever changing. We are part of a river. We are a river rather than a drop of water. That we are a wave rather than a particle. That we are an expression of life expressing itself. And life is an ever unfolding process, not a specific event. And I guess if we step back far enough, our individual lives, the totality of our lives, are a drop of water in a greater river. And so if we look at ourselves as process rather than product, and if we look at ourselves as an expression of life rather than a fixed entity, a unique expression of life, like life expressing itself through this unique vessel in its unique fashion for its unique experience, then we can be both particle and wave. We can, the particle or the drop of water is the totality of our lives. The river that we're in is the river of life that we are part of. And so this is kind of a new revelation of how to experience and talk about this sense of being that I think it's a revelation to me to recognize that one of the biggest challenges that we face is that we're in a world where we perceive particles rather than waves, that we perceive, we try to, we're in a reductionist kind of mindset where we pull out these different pieces and try to understand the whole based on the pieces without looking at how those pieces interact with each other. So I remember in school, we were meant to dissect frogs, which I rebelled against and created an uprising against at that time, but because we could all be dissecting one frog. If we had to dissect a frog at all, we don't have to each have our own frog to take apart. But anyway, if we look at the notion of taking something apart in order to understand it, here you have this frog and you have all the frog parts, and you might be able to recognize then, oh, okay, these are all frog parts, but you can't then put those frog parts back together to get a frog. So somehow we, by trying to understand the whole based on the parts, we can get only so far. We can learn something about the parts, but it doesn't necessarily give us an understanding of the whole. And I think we've tried to understand ourselves based on events in our life, isolated events, and made that the totality of who we are. I think that we have reduced ourselves and each other to these separate elements when we are both particle and wave. We can see it's a lens through which we can see the world from different vantage points, and both are important. Both are important. Particle and wave, they are one and the same thing. They are different expressions or different vantage points of one of the same thing. It made me just think of, there's a wonderful book called Flatland, and it's about living in a 2D world where these different shapes, there were triangles and squares and whatever. But let's just think about it for a moment, when we think of different dimensions, and that I see particles and waves almost as different dimensions of the same thing. A square in Flatland looked like a line. Why? Because you could only see one dimension of it, right? So if the square were traveling on a diagonal, it would look like a line that was growing until as the square was forming, and then when the square was at its diagonal width, then the line would decrease in length, right? So it was a line that would grow and shrink based on the movement of the square that was on a diagonal. And a triangle would start out as like a dot and then become a line that would expand, right? Because if the triangle is coming to you from a point, it would start as a dot. If it was coming to you from a side, it would start as a line, and the line would decrease as the triangle was moving toward you. So we can think of that also as particle and wave in a way, where the actual shape would be the waveform and the 2D representation would be the particle form. I don't know if that's as great an analogy, but the point of that is that based on our vantage point, we have an entirely different experience of what is there. It's the same essence. But it's seen from literally different dimensions. And so when we talk about particle and wave, there's actually a polarity inherent in that. And the likelihood is that there is another dimension from which those polarities are unified, which makes me think of a framework that I learned through an organization called Regenesis, and also through Carol Sanford. I think it's called the Law of Three, but it's so useful to me in thinking about or looking to generate new potentials, new possibilities. And the way that it works is that there is an activating force. So there's an impulse to create something or to do something. There's an activating force, and there's a restraining force. So there's, as soon as we come up with an idea, we come up with reasons why not, right? Or why we can't, or whatever. But there's an activating force and there's a restraining force. And those two things are a polarity, kind of like, in a way, kind of like the wave and the particle, right? And the double slit experiment that shows the light showing up as a wave, and the also shows light showing up as a particle. So there's a duality there that seems irreconcilable. But as we hold that polarity, what happens is that there's this energy that starts building, at least this is in my mind, in the way that energy builds when moving an electron from one quantum state to another. When we have a molecule and electrons are in certain orbitals, when we add energy, the electrons don't gradually shift to another orbital. What happens is all this energy is added, and then there becomes a critical point, and then the electron pops into a different orbital. So we can consider that almost like a different dimension. And if we go back to the law of three with the activating force and the reconciling force, and this energy between them, the friction, the polarity building, then it pops us up to what they have termed the reconciling force, which is this other dimension of perception that allows us as an awareness or a potential that hadn't previously been visible in the polarity. And so this is it's exciting to me because I'm such a nerd to be able to bring these ideas together, you know, the particle and wave, the distinction between intention and goal, where goal is particulate, it is particular, and an intention is creating this greater field of potentials. It leaves room for the unanticipated. It leaves room. It's defined by flow versus will. And it occurs to me that I could go on and on about this because I had a revelation around it in relation to money. Because the way that we have dealt with money is through the particle vantage point, right? That it's fixed, that it's limited, that it's specific. And that all of those mindsets allow us to go into a scarcity mindset versus if we conceive of it as a wave or as a field of energy, then pretty much anything can be pulled from that field of energy. So something to think about, particle and wave. It's very stimulating to me to be exploring that. I hope you get some of the excitement out of it and that I'm not just nerding out all by myself here, but hopefully it gives you a little bit more of a way to find breath in life instead of all the tension of trying to create all these goals, and to instead move into process and allow all of that to be processed. And then we can flow with that river of possibility. So with that, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And I'm so grateful to you for the opportunity to share my nerdiness and hopefully allow all of us to think a little bit more fluidly. So until next time, so much love to you.